Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to section 2, lesson 2. And in section 2, we're covering diacritical marks and related to how to pronounce the Quran. And in lesson 2, we're going to talk all about Tanween. So let's get into it and what that means. I will cover in just a second what is the meaning of Tanween, etc. So on the agenda today, we're going to do a quick review of the previous lesson. And as usual, I'm going to ask you to do the warm-ups. And then I'm going to go into the details of what exactly Tanween is, the three types of Tanween, the different ways of writing it, and how to pronounce it. And I'm going to give you, we're going to continue to work on or give you additional exercise on how to continue spelling in Arabic and how to spell things out. And I will give you additional exercises with Qaida Nuraniya and how to do the exercises in the Quran. I will upload in separate videos. So let's get into it. Okay, review of the previous lesson. What did we learn in the previous lesson? We learned three diacritical marks. We learned the fatha, the dhamma, and the kasra. Where the fatha was a diagonal line above a letter, and when you added a fatha to a letter, the letter was called maftuha. So if it's a hamza, it's hamza maftuha. If it's a ba, it's ba maftuha, etc. And it's a short a sound. The fatha denotes a short a sound, but you must contrast it with the alif, which is the long vowel, which is the equivalent of two fathas, two movements, which is and this is versus So I'll do a quick review of the sounds in just a second. The dhamma, which is the second diacritic we learned in the last lesson, is a curly looking mark above a letter. And whenever a letter gets a dhamma, the letter becomes madmuma. So you call the letter madmuma. So ta madmuma tu, tha madmuma thu, so on and so forth. It denotes a short U or O sound, and you must contrast it with the letter wa, which is the long vowel or the long vowel equivalent of the dhamma, which is the long oo sound or the long o sound. That's the wa sound. The next is the diacritic we learned was the kasra, which is a short diagonal line below a letter, and when a letter gets a kasra, we call the letter a maksura. So ji maksura, ji, ha maksura, hi, so on and so forth. And it denotes the short I sound, and you must contrast it with the letter ya. So the sound is e. So jim maksura ji, ha maksura hi, kha maksura khi, so on and so forth. Okay, so I will quickly do the sounds of the maftuha, maksura, and madmuma letters. If you want, you can go back to the previous lesson for details, but I'll quickly go through this now. A, I, U, B, B, Bu, Ta, Ti, Tu, Sa, Si, Su. Oh, and for the sake of completeness, just like we did in the previous lesson, I'll do one letter with denoting how the letter is done. So this is because this is the ba. Oops, let me go back. Because this is the ba line, this is the ba row, and this is the maftuha column. We say ba maftuha ba, ba maksura bi, ba madmuma bu, ba bi bu. So for the rest of them, I won't do it in that much detail because in the interest of time. So this is ja, ji, ju, ha, hi, hu, kha, khi, khu, da, di, du, the, zi, zu, ra, ri, ru, za, zi, zu, sa, si, su, sha, shi, shu, sa, si, su, da, di, du, da, ti, tu, va, zi, vu, a, i, ru, ra, ri, ru, fa, fi, fu, qa, qi, qu, ka, ki, ku, la, li, lu, ma, mi, mu, na, ni, nu, ha, hi, hu, wa, wi, wu, ya, yi, yu. So that completes a review of the previous lesson. And if you want, you can go back to the previous lesson video, which is section 2 lesson 1, and go into details of how everything is pronounced, etc. Let's move on to the warm-ups. Go ahead, watch the warm-ups video. It's part of this channel. I'll probably include a link in the annotation cards as well. And please don't skip. It's important that you do the warm-ups every time. Okay. On today's lesson, what is Tanween? When you translate Tanween, or when it's written in English, when you explain to somebody in English, what does it mean? It means nunation, or making noon, or adding noon to something. That's pretty much the only description I found of how you can explain to an English speaker what Tanween means, to add noon to something. And it basically adds a second movement mark, or a second fatha, or a dhamma, or a kasra, which denotes the noon sound. So when you have a single fatha, it's a fatha, but when you add a second fatha right above it, it adds a noon sound to it, and I'll explain how that goes in just a second. So just like there were 3 diacritical marks that we learned last time, the fatha, dhamma, and the kasra, its associated tanween are 3. There are 3 types of tanween. When it's a tanween al-fath, or when you add a second fatha on top of another fatha, it becomes either tanween al-fath or fathatan. When you add a kasra below another kasra, it becomes tanween al-kasr or kasratan. Or if you add a dhamma on top of another dhamma, it becomes tanween al-dhamm or dhammatan. And we will go into details of each of these 3 next. Okay, so this short circle, this small circle that I've created here, the 2 diacritics above it, the 2 diagonal lines above it, these 2 diagonal lines denote the fathatan, the diacritic fathatan. That's what it's called, fathatan. It is also known as tanweenul fath. And when you add 2 fathas, one on top of the other on a letter, this little circle that you see, it denotes a letter, just a blank space for a letter. When you add that, it becomes fathatan. So, but the only exception to the fathatan, and it's not true for the kasratan and the dhammatan, is that when you add a fathatan to a letter, you must add an alif after the letter, except when the letter is a ta marbuta or a hamza. But this is only the case for the fathatan, meaning when you add fathatan to a letter, it must be followed by an alif, except when that letter is either a ta marbuta or a hamza, not a hamza, but a hamza with a ha. And if you want details on the ta marbuta and the hamza, you can go into my section 1 lesson 2, I believe, and which is the huruf al-murakkaba, or which is the letters in compound format. And if you want the details on the ta marbuta and the hamza, it's section 1 lesson 1, which goes into details of the hamza. But again, the letter alif, adding the letter alif at the end of a fathatan is only true for fathatan, except obviously when it's ta marbuta or hamza. So, in summation, you must add an alif to the end of a letter when you give it fathatan, except when the letter is a ta marbuta or a hamza. And this is only true for the fathatan. The fathatan, the way you pronounce, you must add an n sound, but you must pronounce the fatha, so it becomes like an. And I'll go into detail of how to pronounce each and every letter with the fathatan in just a second. There are 3 unique ways of writing the fathatan, and that depends on how it is to be pronounced. But I'm not going to go into details on this one. I'm not going to put this in the self-test. The 3 ways of writing, and depending how it is to be pronounced, the 3 ways of how it is written, I'll go into details when we cover the tajweed rule. The tajweed rule is known as ahkam an-nun as-sakina wa tanween. We'll go into details of these 3 later, so I won't put this in the self-test. Next diacritic we're going to learn today is the dhammatan. The dhammatan, also known as tanween al-dhamm. So this little circle above it, the two fatha is sometimes denoted like this. So when you add a fatha, but you add a second fatha on top of it, it becomes dhamma. What am I saying? Not fatha. When you add a dhamma and you add a second dhamma on top of it, it becomes dhammatan. and it is also known as Tanween al-Dhamm. And when it's denoted by one dhamma on top of another, and you pronounce the dhamma, you pronounce the u sound, but you add an n to it, so it becomes like an un. Okay? Un. So again, just like the fathatan, there are three ways of writing it depending on how it is to be pronounced. But I will cover this letter when we go into the details of ahkam an-nun as-sakina wa tanween. The third diacritic that we're going to learn today, that is this little circle is used to denote the letter, is the kasratan, and there's the two diagonal lines below a letter, and this is also known as tanweenul kasr. And the two kasra, one below one below another one, is known as the kasratan. That's what denotes the kasratan. You must pronounce not the fatha. I have miswritten it here. This is not a fatha. You must pronounce the kasra. You must pronounce the kasra, but you must add an n sound to it. And there are three ways of writing it depending on how it is to be pronounced, and I'll cover this later as well. So this is known as the kasratan. Okay? So, first, just like I did in the previous lesson, I will say the letter, because in this case it's going to be the row. I will say its associated column, and then I will say its associated sound. So this is Hamza fathatan an, Hamza kasratan in, Hamza dhammatan un, an, in, un. Now, notice we spoke about that when you add a Hamza, there's a two fatha on top of the Hamza, the fathatan, you don't add another alif after. There is no alif after this Hamza. But because this letter is not a Hamza and not a ta marbuta, this we must add an alif after. So this is, because this is the row is ba fathatan ban, ba kasratan bin, ba dhammatan bun, ban bin bun. This is the second exception that we spoke about just a second ago. Because this is fathatan and there is no, this is a ta marbuta, there is no alif after it. There is no alif after it, and you just say that ta fathatan tan, ta kasratan tin, ta dhammatan tun, tan, tin, tun. This is tha fathatan than, tha kasratan thin, tha dhammatan thun, than, thin, thun. Next we have the Jim. Jim fathatan jan, and again, just like the previous letters, this is exception does not apply. Because this is fathatan, we must enter an alif after it. This is kasratan, we don't enter the alif after the kasratan. So this is Jim fathatan jan, Jim kasratan jin, Jim dhammatan jun, jan, jin, jun. Ha fathatan han, ha kasratan hin, ha dhammatan hun, han, hin, hun. This is kha. Kha fathatan khan, kha kasratan khin, kha dhammatan khun, khan, khin, khun. Dal fathatan dan, dal kasratan din, dal dhammatan dun, dan, din, dun. Zal fathatan dhan, zal kasratan dhin, zal dhammatan dhun, dhan, dhin, dhun. Ra fathatan ran, ra kasratan rin, ra dhammatan run, ran, rin, run. Za fathatan zan, za kasratan zin, za dhammatan zun, zan, zin, zun. Notice that I am adding the noon sound at the end of every letter. So un, in, san, sin, sun, shan, shin, shun, etc. That's why it's called tanween. That's why it's called nunation. So let me find my mouse again. There it is. Sin fathatan san, sin kasratan sin, sin dhammatan sun, san, sin, sun. Shin fathatan shan, shin kasratan shin, shin dhammatan shun, shan, shin, shun. صاد فتحتان صن، صاد كسرتان صن، صاد ضمتان صن، صن صن صن. ضاد فتحتان ضن، ضاد كسرتان ضن، ضاد ضمتان ضن، ضن ضن ضن. طا فتحتان طن، طا كسرتان طن، طا ضمتان طن، طن طن طن. ظا فتحتان ظن، ظا كسرتان ظن، ظا ضمتان ظن، ظن ظن ظن. عين فتحتان عن، عين كسرتان عن، عين ضمتان عن، عن عن عن. غين فتحتان غن، غين كسرتان غن، غين ضمتان غن، غن غن غن. فا فتحتان فن، فا كسرتان فن، فا ضمتان فن، فن فن فن. قاف فتحتان قن، قاف كسرتان قن، قاف ضمتان قن، قن قن قن. كاف فتحتان كن، كاف كسرتان كن، كاف ضمتان كن، كن كن كن. لام فتحتان لن، لام كسرتان لن، لام ضمتان لن، لن لن لن. ميم فتحتان من، ميم كسرتان من، ميم ضمتان من، من من من. نون فتحتان نن، نون كسرتان نن، نون ضمتان نن، نن نن نن. ها فتحتان هن، ها كسرتان هن، ها ضمتان هن، هن هن هن. و فتحتان ون، و كسرتان ون، و ضمتان ون، ون ون ون. يا فتحتان ين، يا كسرتان ين، يا ضمتان ين، ين ين ين، ين ين ين. So in the interest of time, because my last video became very lengthy and I think a little too lengthy, so I'm gonna not do the columns and I'm not gonna do it so slow. Just go ahead and rewind if you need a refresher on how I did all the sounds and how I pronounced them. Okay, spelling continue. We learned the fatha, dhamma, and the kasra in the previous lesson. The fatha, the dhamma, the kasra. And we learned the three types of tanween in this lesson. We learned tanween al-fath, which is the tanween associated with the fatha. We learned the tanween al-kasr, or the tanween associated with the dhamma. And we learned the tanween al-kasr, which is tanween I think I messed up. Tanween al-fath, tanween al-dhamm, and tanween al-kasr. Those are the three tanweens that we learned today. Now that we've learned these, and the fatha, and the dhamma, and the kasra, and the fathatan, and the dhammatan, and the kasratan, we can now start forming some basic words. So I'm going to assign some exercises to you, which you are going to do on your and I'm going to do them and how I'll show you in video how to do those exercises, and you must do those exercises yourself so that you can yourself can start forming some basic words, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. The three exercises that for today's lesson. For today's lesson, I'm going to have you do the Qaida Nuraniya Tanween lesson, which is lesson number 5 in Qaida Nuraniya, and I will upload a separate video on this one as well. I will do another video on Qaida Nuraniya lesson 6, which is making simple words with the Tanween and the Huruf al-Mutaharrika that we learned, which were Dhamma, Fatha, Kasra, and the Dhammata and the Fathata and the Kasratan. This is lesson 6, how to combine the Huruf al-Mutaharrika and Huruf al-Munawwina, which is the Tanween that we learned today, how to combine them and to make simple words. And finally, I'm going to do another exercise, and I will show you how to find or where to locate the Tanween signs in the Quran and what they look like. So I'll do a separate exercise video and this one as well. So I owe you 3 additional exercise video after this one. Okay, in conclusion, what have we learned today? We learned all about Tanween, the Tanween al-Fath, Tanween al-Kasr, and Tanween al-Dhamm, or also called فتحتان ضمتان كسرتان. In the next lesson, we're going to learn all about small vowels and their notation, also known as the صغيرة vowels. I'll go into what that means in the next notation, in the next lesson, and the diacritical marks are known as the صغيرة marks. As part of the self-test, you will be required to recognize all three types of tanween that you learned today and their associated sounds in random order. So what I will have the instructor do is I will have the instructor write down a random letter and put a random tanween on it. Either fathatain, fathatan, dhammatan, kasratan, and you will be required to do this. You will be required to say this is ba fathatan ban. So that is, if you do that correctly, that'll be a point. And if the next one he writes is with a jim and he writes it with kasratan, you will say jim kasratan jin, and that will be another point, and so on and so forth. But I will have him do it in random order. But because it's 28 times 3, it's almost 60. What am I saying? It's almost 90. I don't want to, do every single one. I'll have you only do maybe, I'm going to say maybe 30 or maybe less than that. I'll see. But I'll have the, instructor make sure, the self-tester make sure that that he puts at least one or a few types of both tanween and the letters and what they look like. So, and obviously the instructions that I provided are also some of the normal instructions. For example, what tanween is and what it means, etc. I will provide that in the self-test today. So that'll be it for the self-test. And if you found this video helpful, go ahead and like. If you have any questions, comments, and concerns, leave them below or PM me in this YouTube channel. Or please go ahead and subscribe if you would like additional videos like this one. And don't forget to share with your friends and on Facebook and other places so that you can help spread this knowledge. Jazakallah khair for watching. I will see you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.